10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, the countdown is done, and we are right here at Cricket8 Podcast to discuss about the T20 World Cup, which is 2 weeks into its almost now we are here at the group stage, so there's so much to talk, but we'd also reflect on what has already transpired. I'm Megha and joined by Jared Kimber. To kick things off, is USA genuinely interested in cricket?
No, but if you go back to the history of cricket, you'll find that most teams aren't that interested before their teams are any good, right? Like it's
Mm,
not as if we've had some variants on that. Sri Lanka, India, Australia, Pakistan. There's been a few teams, but generally cricket is kind of there, and then you start to play it at the high level and you get good at it and people get excited, right? Like it's Ireland have done really, really well and are a test playing nation. You still
yeah.
wouldn't say it's massive in Ireland, right? Like, and there's a few countries where it might be the seventh or eighth best, biggest sport. And I think because of the subcontinent, we get a little bit obsessed with cricket needs to be the biggest sport. Well, it doesn't. It could be the second or third biggest sports in some countries, and that would be
Mm,
more than enough.
mm,
So, no, I don't think it's been huge, but let's be honest, USA beating Pakistan and
mm,
playing well against India and the comeback against Canada is huge, right? And it meant that
yeah.
it was on ESPN. It meant that it was mentioned in newspapers and that sports radio, which is kind of how normal American sports fans follow stuff, they all had a chance to talk about it. Then we had the flame wars between the baseball and the cricket people on
Yeah.
Twitter and on TikTok and everywhere else, right? So you would have to say that it's entering in somewhere, but it's very base level. Like I compare this World Cup to the '94 Football World Cup, right? By that stage, a lot of people in America were
Mm,
playing football, and Pele had already played it over there, right? They had a basic understanding of what it was, even if it wasn't their sport. I think cricket's starting at a
mm,
much lower base than that, but the fact that the USA have played so well probably will help in the long run. So I think this has been a
yeah.
huge success for cricket in America. And I don't think I never thought in my wildest dreams it was going to be much bigger than what it is at the moment. So if I was running
Mm,
the tournament, I'd be like, Americans watched it. Americans are talking about it. It's made some media. Job done.
mm. Indeed, and South Asian population there as well, sizable. You saw Nepalese fans turning up in huge numbers. Indian and Pakistani diaspora there as well is sizable. So all that does contribute to ensuring that the stadiums are filled, the stands are filled, and there's no dearth of cheer for at least the team that they are supporting.
No, exactly. And look, America is a nation of immigrants, despite what they kind of try and pretend in some parts
Yeah.
of America.
Yeah.
It is right, a nation of immigrants. And so, the I didn't know there were that many Nepalese people in America, as there seemed to be at Dallas for one of those games, right? So,
Yeah.
you start to see that, and their second and third generations, and it's not just the subcontinental side of things as well. There's a huge West Indian population. We haven't seen them for these games, of course, because the West Indies are playing back at home, but we know that exists as well. And so there's lots of people from around the world. It is a melting pot, America. So you look at USA cricket, and it really is what they've got cricketers from like all over the place representing them, and not just from the USA itself, but also from different parts of the cricket world, because that's what their cricket is, this sort of Frankenstein's monster of all these different places coming together. So I thought the crowds were fine. There was a couple of games that was like, was it the first game in New York that was at like 11 a.m. On a Monday morning in New York? Like, we got 4,000 people to it. That's probably not ideal, but at the same time, if you're going to have an early morning game on a Monday morning, you probably got to expect that sort of stuff for a Sri Lanka, South Africa game. But there were plenty of other games that have really good atmosphere. And we know that crowds come out in Dallas and, Florida. Unfortunately, the entire place seems to be underwater, so I don't know. I don't know if that one worked quite as well. But yeah, I think people did turn up. And why am I on my own? I seem to be hosting the show. Mega has lost it completely. But I think, one of the things that is really good, and you look at the Champions Trophy when it is hosted in England as well. And one of the great things about those sorts of countries that aren't monocultures and, people move to and bring their I was going to say aspirations, but aspirations is probably the wrong term, right? But, bring their historic love of cricket with them and everything else. And sometimes continue to support their team, and sometimes their first and second generation still support the original team rather than the other one. And there's also splits and everything else. It means that when you have World Cups and when you have Champions Trophies and ICC events in those sorts of countries, other fans turn up. And one of my favorite ones, Mega, thank you for coming back and saving me from my own monologue here. But one of my favorite ones was, do you remember when the World Cup was played the last T20 World Cup was played in Australia? And suddenly there were Zimbabweans everywhere traveling around the country following their team. And that's a thing that you get in modern Western societies, which is different to what we get in the Asian countries. And again, that's a plus for cricket, that it has access to so many different kinds of markets.
You going gaga over USA probably got me to vanish. But anyway, moving on and talking about the teams, Pakistan. Is Pakistan still stuck in the past? They did have a great initiation to the T20s, won the second World Cup, second edition, first time around, finished narrowly number 2. But what's going wrong?
It's a very good question. I think the interesting thing about them is they do play T20 in a slightly older fashion. I think we all know that. They think of pass scores, right? And they still attack, but they attack with the ball rather than with the bat.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, without attacking spinners over the last couple of years, that's been harder for them to do because they kind of attack with their seamers at either end, and in the middle, they're still sort of very defensive. But the weird thing about their batting is, for all the talk about how defensive they are, they kept losing wickets. So it's hard to throw their defensive mindset completely under the bus. And I don't like it, and I don't like the way they play. But you look at Babar Azam and Mohammad Rizwan, looking back, they were probably quite right not to attack more at times because of how many wickets they lost. The problem is, and this is where this is chicken and egg type situation we get to, right? Because there's the lack of pressure that they put on the opposition caused some of these problems. And I remember, was it when South Africa struggled against Nepal, and you go back and you have a look at the footage, and you're like, well, South Africa wasn't trying to put any pressure on Nepal. So all Nepal did was keep putting the ball in the right area, and it was Nepal, wasn't it? Yeah, Nepal, I got the right team. And they didn't put any pressure back on them, right? And you look at Pakistan and some of those games, they just didn't put any pressure on the opposition enough. And so they kept getting themselves into difficult situations. And then they had mega collapses, right? Like suddenly everyone was going out at the same time. So I don't know how I feel about their tournament overall if I would have thought if they would have lost, it would have been because they kept setting 160 and teams kept chasing it easily because they were being too defensive. When it comes down to it, they didn't make enough runs because no one could stay in.
You're talking about the finalists of the previous edition, but we all know how they huffed and puffed their way to the finals, barring the semi-finals where they did actually turn up against New Zealand. But are their administrators doing them any good? Because there have been constant changes at the helm. You make one person the captain, that's Shaheen Shah Afridi. You get him accustomed to the power and the prestige that accompanies captaincy, and then Babar Azam is back in. So we talk about the groups that get formed and all of that. Could you see that palpable this time around as well?
So there's a couple of teams who haven't made it through, right? So if you look at all of those teams, you think to yourself, what should I be doing next? So Pakistan, Sri Lanka, New Zealand, and you can throw Ireland in there as well, right? 4 test teams who haven't gone in. Maybe Zimbabwe if you want to go off to another team who didn't even make it, right? But those 4 major test teams there, you look at those teams and you say to yourself, okay, what's the plan that they need to have? They need to work out how they want to play T20 that best suits the kind of players that they make. And they need to go off for the next couple of years and get that ready for the next World Cup, right? But you and I both know that in Pakistan, that doesn't matter because they might have 4 coaches and 5 captains by that point. So even if they work out exactly what they're supposed to do, there will be a sabotage notion of that. I think you're right. And we all know that that's right. That's... 5 minutes ago, Shaheen was the guy who was going to be leading them into this World Cup, and that was their thing. And then they're like, no, we're going to change it all again. Coaches, selectors. I mean, there was a 4-month period there where I don't think anyone in the PCB knew what their job was because every week they seemed to have a different job, right? You can't have that if you're trying to plan for a World Cup correctly. That's not to forgive the fact that the batters kept going out over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a separate issue. But that's not a good place. If you look at the stability of the top sides, right? Like Matthew Mott has been a little bit under the firing line because they lost that last World Cup, right? They didn't start this one very good. Chances are, though, England still would have said, no, we thought he was the right player for the right time. We're going to give him right coach for the right time. We're going to give him a little bit longer to see how he goes, right? Whereas with Pakistan, if Matthew Mott would win at one tournament and lose the next one, there would be 3 other coaches between times as well. So how do you plan? And I don't think that's a good system.
Indeed. Gary Kurtzen did sound concerned because he mentioned that I've just joined the team. It's just been 10 days. It'll take me time to understand the players, because what else is he supposed to say? He's been the captain, rather the coach of the Indian team that went on to win the 2011 World Cup. He has seen success and he thought that model could be replicated with Pakistan. Maybe not so much, or maybe not like for like. But anyway, talking about the reactions that accompany any such Pakistan performance, of course, social media goes berserk. Pakistanis are very witty, are very humorous. The sort of tweets and the sort of memes that they come up are very entertaining for somebody who's a neutral and isn't that much concerned about Pakistan cricket. But the reactions of the former players, at times it's nasty. Is that the norm in maybe other sports, in other countries? Because we don't see the former players getting just as nasty.
I just, some of the stuff is just, it's kind of pointless. I don't know if you remember, but when Australia lost in the home World Cup in 2022, was it?
Yeah, 2022.
Yeah, there's so many World Cups, it's hard to remember what year they are there. When they lost in that one, the Australian players were, they're not hard enough, and they're not blah, blah, blah. And then they go to India and won the 50 over World Cup, right? Then they win and they won the World Test Championship before that. And it's like, well, where are those, have the players got harder? Have they got more Australian in this time? Like, former players, there's a lot of nonsense spoken. I honestly wonder how much time these guys actually spend thinking about it, and then they get called up by someone. They say their piece, or in some cases, and look, there's a lot of cricket media that is like this now. And, I think Michael Vaughan probably was a pioneer of this method of, I'm going to be very hot takey. I'm going to say things really, really loudly. I'm going to be out there. I'm going to be the Piers Morgan of cricket broadcasters, right? And what that does is, now it seems like everyone does that. And as you know, in India and Pakistan, there's so many channels and so many different people trying to get heard. I don't see how saying that the play, like, who was watching that game, either of those games, and thinking that the players weren't trying? They played terrible against the USA and almost stole that game, right? They were on top against India for ages and probably just never broke the game completely free, right? Those are the 2 games that ultimately cost them. I wasn't watching any of those games going, the problem here is the Pakistani players don't love Pakistan enough, or the Pakistan players aren't trying hard enough. It's just nonsense. And it's almost always nonsense, right? But my guess is that Euros are on at the moment. And I would assume when some teams get kicked out of the Euros, we'll hear the same sort of stuff, right? It's just lazy analysis. It's not what you get here on Cricket 8, Mega. It's not what you get here. Unless Rob's tired. Sometimes when Rob's tired.
Because toxicity sells, maybe we might... we're not heading in that path, no matter what. Toxicity sells, but we're not going to sell it. Moving on to New Zealand, and very anti-toxic. New Zealand, of course, the players, the supporters, and the former players as well. But what went wrong for them? Arrived late, arrived in batches. There were players who featured in the IPL but didn't get enough games, including their captain. Even before that, there were players injured, couple of them, important players, including Devon Conway. And no practice games. Do you think that could have made a difference? Because it looked like they were just warming up, and by that time, the World Cup was over for them.
Yeah, they were just, it was so disorganized from the start, wasn't it? It really, looking back on it, and they were probably unlucky, as you said, IPL, like Glenn Phillips didn't play in the IPL, Devon Conway was injured, Kane Williamson didn't play. Like, a lot of different things happened in the IPL that didn't go their way as a team. And then, the practicing. I remember before the Guyana game, I think it was Mark Chapman was doing a press conference, and he was basically saying, look, we haven't practiced under lights at this ground yet, and we would really have liked to have done that. But they had a chance of a practice game. They had a chance of arriving earlier. Maybe this is the new normal of some of those elite tier teams, where they're going to have to just hope everything works when they get there at the last minute. And it fell apart. Honestly, though, once I looked at the schedule, and it's not that I thought New Zealand were a bad side, but once I looked at the schedule and knowing the way that the West Indies and Afghanistan play, I thought it was quite a tough draw. Just Guyana is such a singular wicket. It's not really like other places, right? And I thought they were against it. So I bet against them for the Afghanistan game, and I thought, it might be touch and go. It wasn't touch and go. Like, I just put the money on and just collected it, right? Like, it was the easiest bet I've ever made. And you know, with the West Indies game, they still should have won that, New Zealand, right? Like, Shafane Rutherford's innings was ridiculous, and they should have won it. But, you know, the interesting thing for this is we thought that was a group of death, but we didn't really factor in that one of the three teams that was vying for it was just not going to get going, and not enough practice, not enough time together, not enough game time. I don't know, like, you look at you look at Sri Lanka and Pakistan, and Ireland. I think I know exactly how they want to play T20 cricket. I might disagree with it, but I think I know exactly how they want to play T20 cricket. I wasn't sure coming into this World Cup exactly if New Zealand knew what style of T20 cricket they wanted to play, and whatever they wanted to play, Mega, they didn't play it.
Indeed. Where are you keeping all that money? Because you won a handsome amount from that bet. But anyway, we'll not reveal a lot of your net worth here. Where is it? We'll not reveal your net worth here because people might just be startled hearing if people can make so much money. But
so many
talking
billions,
about
it's so many billions that it would be embarrassing for me to talk about the amount of money I made off that bet.
Well, after this podcast, I might try and dig up that information. But Kane Williamson and the stars in transition for the New Zealand team. Of course, Trent Boult has announced that this would be his last T20 World Cup. And the ODI World Cup, again, the ODI version is after the next T20 World Cup in 2027. So, highly likely we wouldn't get to see him in another World Cup from here on. Are the stars aging? Is it the end of that golden era of New Zealand cricket team that saw them make it to all the semi-finals and beyond 2015 onwards?
Yeah, I mean, they won the World Test Championship, didn't they? And they made a couple of finals as well. So, and probably.
Why did you have to remind me that?
I'm pretty sure. I have to go back and check, but I think they defeated a team. I can't remember who it was in the final. But you know, should have won the 2019 World Cup. Certainly went as close as anyone has ever gone to winning a World Cup and not winning it. So yeah, I think the golden era has been breaking up for a while, right? Like in different ways. Like in the Test team, like losing Ross Taylor and BJ Watling was a big part. And we asked even someone like Kane Williamson, he might play in he might technically be in the IPL, but I don't know if anyone thinks of him as a T20 player anymore. And as you said, Trent Boult and Tim Southee, a lot of these guys are just aging out. I think they're the most interesting team because I think Pakistan and Sri Lanka, you know, Sri Lanka have a really young core, right? And they can go back, hopefully fix their batting, their bowling's fine, and then come back. Pakistan maybe have some big questions about what kind of T20 cricket they want to play in the future, but again, there's a lot of players there that will be around in future editions, whereas New Zealand almost have to go, is it worth for that next World Cup? Almost trying something completely new and going from there. They've been flirting with guys like Mark Chapman and Glenn Phillips and Michael Bracewell. None of them are actually young, right?
Yeah.
And they've been backups for a long time or on the fringe for a long time. You know, do they skip all that generation? You know, Tim Seifert, right? You know, Finn Allen. They've never fully committed to any of those guys, 100%, I don't believe, you know. And now they're in a situation, is that what they do? Do they hand the team over? Do they find a young captain out of one of those guys and just go, okay, we've got Rachin Ravindra, you know, we'll keep Devon Conway for a little while, maybe Daryl Mitchell, but let's just flush everything out, start again, and what kind of cricket do we want to play as a team? And it'd be really interesting. I think their batting, from what I've seen, should be fine. I think that next generation of bowlers, I'm not sure I've seen a lot of great white ball bowlers coming out of New Zealand. So most of their success is having steady batting with good new ball bowling. That may not be what we see in that next generation.
Indeed. You kept mentioning about Sri Lanka in passing numerous times, so I'm tempted to ask you in detail about what went wrong for Sri Lanka. Of course, they were complaining about scheduling and they had to travel so much because the hotel was around 2 hours away from the venue, and even the practice grounds, they were pretty far away. But then remember 2022 edition of the Asia Cup, where they went on to lift it. Even before that, in 2021, when they defeated India in a T20I series at home, there was a lot of turmoil, particularly in 2021 at home, back home, and they stood together because probably that turmoil united them. But then since the previous World Cup, it's all been going haywire for them.
It's weird. So they turned up in Australia with what we thought was going to be a great bowling attack, and they were injured the entire time. And then they went to the ODI World Cup with, again, a really good bowling attack, which wasn't as injured, and yet didn't play all that great, right? And so you are left kind of trying to work out what is happening. But the issue is that I think if everyone's fit, they've got fantastic bowling. I'm going to put this out here, Mega. I'm not sure. Maybe if you look at the best 4 bowlers of any team, if they don't have the best 4 bowlers available to them. And I'm not sure Tashara is part of that. I'd probably put Madhushankar in ahead. I'd have had Madhushankar, Patharana, and then the 2 spinners. And India and Australia both have really good bowling lineups. I'm not sure if it's better than that top 4 that I've just said there, right? With India, you've got the depth, so you have a little bit, a little bit different there. But that's an incredible bowling lineup. Now let's go through this tournament. The first game they made 77.
Yeah.
Now they actually bowled brilliantly in that game, but to defend 77, you have to be perfect, right? And they weren't perfect in that game, and ultimately that cost them. The next game, they made 124 for 9. Right, on a much better pick. That was in Dallas, right? In this tournament, that's a batting pitch, right? And they made 124 for 9, a terrible score. They were dreadful, and they almost defended it, right? They Bangladesh passed it down with 2 wickets to spare with 6 balls to go, right? And there were times watching that game you thought, oh, Sri Lanka's going to win this. So if they'd made 100 against South Africa and 135 against Bangladesh, we're not talking massive totals here. You would have to have said that their bowling would have stood up. So we know what the problem is. The first time we saw them bat properly in this tournament, really, is that game against Netherlands, right? And even then, at times, they weren't doing particularly well. So they had 3 games against good teams. They never played Nepal, so and it might be that might be a good thing because Nepal's bowling is really good. They might have kept them in some trouble. But you look at the 3 games, they only batted above par in 1. Right? And I'm not saying that they had to score 120 in New York because we know how tough that wicket was. But 90, 95 would have been in the game. And that Dallas wicket, it was probably the toughest Dallas wicket of all the wickets in Dallas. 124 was still at least 15 runs under par, maybe 20 runs under par on that, right? There's no point having a great bowling attack if you can't make any runs at all.
Yeah. Indeed. I mean, even in the Asia Cup that I was alluding to, there were so many bowlers injured, so many pacers injured, yet there'd be someone coming up and filling that position. How long can one cope with that? Well, the limits were tested previously in the ODI World Cup and now in this T20 World Cup. Now, another team that eventually is now compelled to pack its bags and head home is Scotland. They did put up a brave front after that truncated game against England. In fact, that was washed out due to the rain, but putting up that 90-run opening stand and giving England that scare, and even continuing with that scare till later on in the tournament. What did you make of Scotland's performances?
It's funny when you look at the teams who have qualified. I think Scotland's probably better than the United States. They've probably played as good cricket as Bangladesh, I would have said, as well. So they've played qualification-worthy cricket, right? I think they played really, really good cricket. The Australian team that they pushed was it wasn't a full-strength bowling lineup, but it was a full-strength batting lineup, and they put a lot of pressure under them and put themselves in a position to be able to win that game. We have no idea what would have happened with that England game if there was no rain at all, or if England went out to play. But I think they would have given themselves a fair chance there of being quite good as well. So you look at that from that perspective, and they've had a fantastic tournament. The game against Oman, that was one of the... No one's chased any runs in this tournament with any confidence, and they absolutely smashed that. Yeah. And the other game was Namibia, wasn't it? That Namibia game, they collapsed in the middle. They had Brandon McMullen. I don't know if you remember this. It's such a random one. But Brandon McMullen was stumped because he forgot he was out of his crease. So he played the shot and just stood there and didn't put his foot back, right? And just thought he was in his crease. And so they had a moment where you're just like, oh my God. And then they just creamed Namibia from then on in, as if to go, oh, okay, yeah, we made a couple of errors, now we're going to fix that. And the same with the Oman game where, they started a little bit slowly and then just absolutely destroyed them. And they held it up really well against the two sides. They played brilliant cricket. It's really unfortunate. I think if they were in another group and not going up against the England-Australian group, which is pretty strong, I'd be fascinated to see how they would have gone in the Afghanistan-West Indies group. I'd be fascinated to see how they would have gone in the South Africa-Bangladesh group or the India-USA group. There's a couple of other groups where I'm like, you played that amount of good cricket, I'll see how we go. And I think they're finally assembling a really, really good side. I'm nothing but respect for what they managed to do. And I feel a little bit unfair. It's a little bit unfair for them that they're not going through to the next round. They certainly gave it their all.
Look how you found a way to troll Pakistan by mentioning you would have wanted to see what would have happened had they belonged to that group, which had India and Pakistan, and apart from Ireland, of course, with due respect. Now, talking about the wickets, they have managed to garner a lot of attention ahead of the World Cup. Rohit Sharma talked about packing the squad with spinners because they expected a lot of sprint-friendly wickets in the West Indies in particular. It was expected in the USA Pacers would benefit a lot from the conditions. Now, they did benefit. We did see them ruling the roost. But what do you make in general of the wickets? They're all very dissimilar to each other, even in the same country. And of course, in West Indies, they're different islands, different countries. So unexpected diversity there. But bowlers are having a say.
It's funny. They're all very different, which you're right, except for the fact that they're all low scoring.
Yeah.
Outside of Dallas and Antigua and probably St. Lucia, which we haven't seen that much cricket at yet, but I'm assuming St. Lucia is going to be like that as well. Everything else has been low scoring. The other thing is, Rohit was right, to think that seam would do very well. But even if you look at the West Indian wickets, the seamers have still done very, very well. So it hasn't just been spin dominating the way that we thought. But there have been some pitches where hitting spin has almost been impossible, but plenty of wickets where there weren't. Look, I thought it would be a low-scoring tournament, and I did a video during the IPL for Cricket8 where we talked about that, where we talked about World Cups are usually low-scoring tournaments. Even thinking this was going to be a low-scoring tournament, I had no idea we were going to get this low. It's like every wicket is Guyana, and you can't do it.
Yeah.
The New York wicket was unsafe, and the wicket that they played on the other day, which is at Namibia, England, when there were chunks coming out of it, again, that wasn't unsafe because it was a bad wicket, but it was unsafe because it was probably too wet. Certainly it looked like the pitch got wet to me. Usually that's what a divot coming out of it means. The rest of the wickets have been great in that they've been close games, but it hasn't been T20 cricket as we've expected it. But maybe it's given us more cliffhangers than we would normally get. But we haven't had many sixes. So it really depends on how you like your cricket. To go from the IPL, which was the fastest scoring tournament we've ever had in T20 cricket, to this World Cup, where it's almost impossible to hit the ball off the square and where, 95 and 105 is defendable, it's a remarkable switch. And it's one of the weird things about this tournament is we didn't quite know what the wickets were going to be. We probably also, like the St. Vincent's wicket, for instance, there hadn't been any major cricket played on that in 10 years, right? And that was, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was supposed to be where they were playing games in Jamaica, which would have been a much more normal T20 wicket. So we even had wickets swapped out. And the Florida one, which usually you would expect to be a pretty good wicket, has been, as we said before, completely flooded. So we haven't got the most out of it. I would say Dallas has been the most interesting wicket because we've seen sixes and fours, but the bowlers have also done well at various times. And it looks like, to me, Antigua and St. Lucia are going to be the ones where we get runs. But what I love about World Cups is that you have to problem solve, right?
Yeah.
We've never seen a World Cup with this many. I mean, India is about to start the second part of the World Cup, and all the information they've gleaned from the first part of the World Cup means nothing to them. Like, I kind of like that, right? Like, it's so different, and you have to work it out on the fly. So I think that's what a World Cup should be. It should be difficult all the way through.
You talked about that England-Namibia game. Now, no matter what was pouring from above or what was popping out from beneath, England would have still continued to play that game for their 2 points that obviously determine their progress to the Group 8. And with not much time remaining now, how do you look back at this tournament of upsets? Just the first stage, just the first part of it, the group stage. There are 3 teams that one expected at least for them to progress to the Group of 8 that have been knocked out. How does it look like?
I just think it's entertaining, right? Like there are a lot of people who didn't want 16 teams in this World Cup, and I think people like me have been saying for a long time that associate cricket's just got so much better. And I think we've seen that in this World Cup, but we've also seen, the associates amongst themselves, those games can be incredibly, hard fought. The Papua New Guinea, Uganda game was so hilarious in a low-scoring epic game, and then Oman Namibia was another game, right? And USA Canada, you can throw that one in there as well. So I think if you like close games, I don't know if we've ever had a World Cup with this many close games before. It just feels like there's been so many classics. If you like runs, and boundaries,
Yeah.
probably not the World Cup for you. And if you like consistent time zone, so you know when the games are actually going to be played, also not the World Cup for you. But all things considered, it's a bad time zone. It's been stretched out everywhere. We've had some terrible wickets in New York. We've had some other issues. I think the games have been really, really low, gritty, entertaining games. So, I don't know, you take that as a win, I suppose.
And we're just getting started because the group stage would commence and then we have the 2 semi-finals and the finals to look ahead to at Cricket 8 as well, because there'll be so much content emerging out of all of those matches. As of now, we are signing off, but stay tuned because we're getting you content every day. Thank you, Jared, and bye-bye.